Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Paoli, editor, and I am pleased to be moderating our first session as well as welcoming you to our Ransomware Top Threats and Best Practices for 2023 Summit, brought to you by Zerto, Unitrends, Abnormal Security, and HYCU. The editorial staff of redmondmag.com, Virtualization and Cloud Review, and AWSinsider.net have worked hard to bring together some of the best independent experts on the topic for this event, so we really hope you enjoy it. Before we start today's event with these three great sessions, we do have some announcements. First, we wanted to let you know this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You'll receive an email when the replay is available, generally within the next few days. Each of today's three sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A, so please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A area of your console. During today's third session, we will be giving away a Bose noise canceling headphones, but you must be present to win, so be sure to stay on for the entire event. Finally, we do have resources from our sponsors Zerto, Unitrends, Abnormal Security, and HYCU available on the console right now. So please download and check those out. It's because of their underwriting of this content that we can bring you this summit. So we thank them for sponsoring and supporting the community and ask you to check out those resources so we can bring you more events like this in the future. Now on to the first session of today's summit, Top Enterprise Ransomware Threats. This session features Alan Liska, Intelligence Analyst. Alan has regularly appeared on PBS NewsHour, CNN, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and has been quoted in the Financial Times, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. He has written many articles about ransomware and co-wrote the book Ransomware, Defending Against Digital Extortion. He is the author of The Practice of Network Security, Building an Intelligence-Led Security Program, and Securing NTP, a quick start guide, and the co-author of DNS Security, Defending the Domain Name System. Take it away, Alan.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for attending today. I always love these sessions, and I really love the questions we get at the end. So anything that pops in mind, please put it in the Q&A box so that we can talk about it at the end of the session. As Chris said, my name is Alan Liska. I am a ransomware researcher for Recorded Future, and I've written a couple books on ransomware and spend a lot of time talking and thinking about ransomware. As much as I'd like to think about other things, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be going away, so I think I'm going to be doing this for a while. So before we can talk a little bit about the threats that enterprises are facing, we should talk about where we stand with ransomware. There were a lot of articles written at the end of 2022 discussing how ransomware attacks appear to be down. And it's really hard to know because there's no one authoritative source of reporting for ransomware attacks because most ransomware attacks aren't required to be reported to a government or anything, and there's certainly no international body. So we never have a really good picture of where ransomware stands. But broadly speaking, the general consensus was that ransomware attacks were down a little bit in 2022. Certainly there's some really good reporting by companies like Chainalysis that say that, in fact, not just ransomware attacks were down, but overall payments were down, at least, according to their ability to track. And so that's really good. Unfortunately, it seems like the ransomware actors heard that and said, hold my vodka, and redoubled their efforts to start 2023 off. So if you look through April 24th of this year, there have been 1,106 publicly reported ransomware attacks. These are ransomware attacks that made it to ransomware data leak or extortion sites, which is only a small fraction of the total number of ransomware attacks. And you compare that to 2022 through April 30th, there were 968 that were reported there. So, already we're talking about over a 20% increase in the total number of attacks year over year. And that's just the publicly reported attacks. And again, that's only a small fraction of the total number of attacks. By far, the United States makes up the biggest portion of these attacks. Some of the other countries that have been hit hard this year, you look at, this is just through 2023, United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, Italy, India. We tend to see a lot of the same countries over and over again. And while the 46.9% of victim countries for the United States is bad, it's actually down compared to previous years. So ransomware actors are really kind of spreading their attacks all over the world. We're seeing a big increase in attacks in places like South America and Africa and other places that traditionally have been ignored by ransomware groups as they continue to kind of spread and go through their go after as many targets as possible. As far as top ransomware groups, Lockbit by far is still the most popular. We're definitely seeing some fraying in some of the Lockbit stuff, some of the Lockbit activity. They're sort of losing control of some of their affiliates. But by far, they're still the most active group and still kind of the biggest threat out there. We also look at Royal Ransomware as really one of the growing ransomware groups. They're not new, but they are relatively new, and they continue to carry out attacks at a high level. Beanling, which is a Russian ransomware group that's trying to pretend they're Chinese. It's fascinating. We've seen some links from the sort of the Beanling internal discussions, and it's all in Russian. So when they do negotiations, they negotiate in Chinese and pretend to only speak Chinese. But then internally, they are absolutely based in Russia, or at least in one of the Russian affiliated countries. Vice Society is another one, but Vice Society primarily focuses on going after schools and universities. Occasionally, they'll hit other targets, but they really, really like to disrupt schools because they're just giant bastards, I guess. Because you don't make a whole lot of money going after schools. Schools tend not to pay. And then AlphaB, which is also known as Black Hat, is another one that's growing and growing quickly in terms of the number of attacks. But that's kind of the groups that are the biggest threats right now and where we see the most activity. But the ransomware kind of market, for lack of a better term, is always changing and always fluid. So, this time last year, Conti would have dominated the number of victims, but now Conti doesn't exist anymore. Although the members are still there, they're just parts of other groups. So what we see, for the first quarter of the year, or first third of the year, may be very different by what we see by the end of the year. But again, just something to keep in mind as you're looking for setting up your defenses. These right now are what we have to worry about the most. Before we can talk about how to defend against ransomware attacks, we really should talk about how a ransomware attack works, how a modern ransomware attack works. And if you've been to any of these sessions that I've done, you've probably seen this chart, because it's still a good analysis of how a modern ransomware attack works. So there's a division of labor in ransomware. Generally, you're not dealing with a single attacker. There are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, when we talk about the division of labor, you have what are called initial access brokers. And the initial access brokers are the ones who gain the access to the networks. And they can do that through, primarily we see one of 6 ways, through phishing campaigns, credential stuffing, credential reuse. There are so many credentials that have been leaked in underground forums that it's almost like shooting fish in a barrel. You can grab a credential, try it in a network, gain that access. Through third parties, through your partners and vendors, ransomware actors will gain access that way. Exploitation, social engineering, and then insider threat. Those are kind of the ways that these initial access brokers are looking to gain traction in your network. Once they've gained access, they generally turn it over to a ransomware actor. So either one of the owners of the ransomware as a service group or one of the affiliates for the ransomware as a service group. And there's a few ways that that's done. Some work very closely together. So like the Black Basta ransomware, we see work a lot with Quackbot, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, where they basically pay Quackbot to sponsor a phishing campaign. Quackbot does that, and then any successful points of entry are flipped over to them automatically, and that's part of the total cost of running the phishing campaign. In other cases, there are underground forums, and there are private, like Telegram and Tox channels, where the initial access brokers basically hold auctions and say, hey, I have access to a financial services company in the United States with 8,000 employees and $2 billion in revenue. Who's going to offer me $10,000 for access to this server? And think of it like the kind of the worst house flipping show ever. But it is part of this broader ransomware underground economy. So all these services that have popped up in support of ransomware groups. So after the initial access broker gets their access, they then turn that over to the ransomware group, whoever buys that access. And then the ransomware actor moves through the network. And they tend to use either Cobalt Strike and Group Mattel, which are two what we call red teaming tools, so tools that are used by red teamers to test the security of the network. They're also used by bad guys. Or some of them prefer to do what we call living off the land, so using tools that are built into Windows systems to find ways to get access. And then there are a number of freely available tools that they like to use, whether you're talking about Mimikatz or Bloodhound, AdFind, AdRecon, Metasploit, things that help them kind of get around the network. They're looking for a few things. They're looking for data to steal, and they're looking for, obviously systems to encrypt. So one of the things that's really important is the ransomware actors will get on the domain controller, because from the domain controller, they can push out their ransomware and they basically have full access. So the domain controller is really important to the ransomware actors, and not just ransomware actors, almost every threat actor that spends time in a network eventually wants to land on the domain controller. The other thing that ransomware actors are looking for is Windows servers and ESXi servers, especially if they can just walk right in. If they can find like an Excel spreadsheet that has a password for all of the servers, they love that, and they will absolutely look for files, name, passwords, and other things to see if they can get direct access to those servers. Once they have access to the main controller and they know they have access to the servers they need, they'll take all the files that they want from the network and they'll copy it off. From there, they'll deploy the ransomware. And then on the other side, you have kind of the extortion ecosystem. You have where they're going to try and pressure the victim to pay. And it could be as simple as, if you don't want your files posted and you want the files that have been encrypted, decrypted, give us money and we'll give you the key. But they can also do more things. We've seen oftentimes in schools, ransomware actors will email the parents and say, hey, we have your kid's sensitive data and the school won't pay, so we want you to know it's the school's fault that your kid's sensitive data is going to be released on our website, obviously not realizing it's actually their own fault for just being evil. But But sometimes that negotiation is actually handled by the person that runs the ransomware as a service group rather than the ransomware actor or the affiliate themselves, just because they've got the infrastructure, they can handle the processing and the money laundering and so on. So the negotiation will be handled by the person who manages the RAS group, not the individual threat actor. That's very broadly how a ransomware attack works today. There are, as I said, there are some exceptions and some things that you need to, some groups are a little bit different than others. There's some that are extortion only, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But broadly, that's kind of what we're looking at for a modern ransomware attack. And so to the point, when we're trying to figure out how to detect, especially if we're trying to detect early, a ransomware attack early on, a great example is BlackBox and QuackBot. So QuackBot is it's an evolved banking Trojan, right? It used to be simply a banking Trojan. It would land and it would steal all your banking credentials and any usernames and passwords you could find, and then stay resident until you found it and got rid of it. Now it does more than that. It still does that. Don't get me wrong. Like if QuackBot landed in your network, it's stealing all your credentials and sending them back. But now it also is used to deploy ransomware. So in this case, BlackBox is very commonly used. So understanding how some of these loaders work, because these loaders are often a precursor to a ransomware attack. So understanding how these loaders work and what you should be looking at in terms of how they are evading detection is really important, because if you can stop the loader, then you don't have to worry about any of the other steps that we talked about during the campaign, because you've kept them from even getting a foothold in your network. So understanding the different loaders that ransomware actors use, how they use them, and how they avoid detection. It's a lot. Don't get me, I'm not saying this is easy. You can see from this chart here all the different ways that QuackBot tries to avoid detection. But if you can stop them from infiltrating the network at the loader level, then you stop the ransomware attack entirely. So, I highly recommend looking at some of these capabilities and making sure that you have protections in place against them. One of the things that most of these loaders do is they have to kill whatever endpoint protection you have in place. So if you're running 1001 or you're running, or you're running CrowdStrike Falcon or whatever, they have to kill that process. Because if they don't, that endpoint protection will detect their activity. They're not stealthy enough to avoid that. So when they land on the network, one of the first things they will do is they will kill the endpoint detection. And so I tell people, please make sure that you have an alert set up in your SIEM so that when a third-party application kills your security tool, you mark that as a high alert. And that can be really important and can be really beneficial. And it doesn't take a lot of fancy rules or anything like that. It's just something other than shutting down the machine killed my security tool. Let's go investigate, right? That's a real simple playbook that I think almost every organization can do, because there's generally no legitimate reason for a third-party tool to kill your endpoint protection. So having those kind of logs in place can be really important. In fact, two of the tools that are used often, although interestingly not as much, Backstab and AUKill are two well-known tools that ransomware actors and loaders like to use to kill your security endpoints. You'll notice though there was a switch in December of last year. There's like almost no overlap between where Backstab at the bottom was used pretty consistently, and then use and stop as more ransomware groups started adopting AU kill. These are legitimate red team tools, so they are designed to be used by red teams to try and pen test and infiltrate. What that means for you is they have well-known file hashes. So if you're running an EDR in your network, you can actually input their known file hashes. There's like 6 versions of AU kill that have been released, but as new versions are released, you can plug those file hashes into your EDR and look for that tool being used, because there is no legitimate reason for that tool other than red team exercises. And if you're the blue team and you catch the red team, it's nice to have the blue team win for once, right? So the worst that happens is, congratulations, we identified the red team trying to pen test us. So, that's one of these kind of easy things. And again, another one of these easy things to do. If you have EDR, feed these file hashes into EDR, and when a ransomware actor tries to download it or the loader tries to download it to deploy it, you can catch it early, and hopefully you can stop it before, before they have the chance to do a lot of damage in your network. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is find ways to stop the ransomware attack before they can steal files, before they can deploy the ransomware. We really want to, obviously the earlier is better. The earlier the better. The other thing is ransomware actors love PowerShell. There's a lot of PowerShell in use in these, by these ransomware groups. So PowerShell is another thing that, I really encourage people to spend time looking for new and unusual PowerShell. But you can see almost every ransomware group has some sort of PowerShell that they use in their network. So ideally, what would be great is if in your organization you could disable PowerShell on a machine that doesn't need it. Like, your administrators probably need it, and you probably need it on your servers, but you probably don't have people in accounting that actually need to run PowerShell. And so if you have that need, if you don't have that regular need in your network for PowerShell, then you shouldn't have it enabled on every machine. I know that's really hard to do. Like, it's easy for me to sit here and say, oh yeah, just go ahead and disable PowerShell on all endpoints that don't need it, and you'll probably have your admins kind of tearing their heads out. No, I need PowerShell on every machine because I never know what I'm going to need to do. There are ways to use PowerShell remotely without having it installed on every machine, but it means kind of retooling. It may mean retooling how you do your work, and that's a pain, and I get it, but it is ideal if you could disable it. If you can't disable it, then the other thing that I recommend is log PowerShell. And that's something that a lot of organizations don't do, but PowerShell logging provides a lot of really valuable data. And again, I know the counter argument is, we're already spending so much money on Splunk. If I throw PowerShell logs into there, I'm just going to have to spend more money, and I'm going to have to, develop more analytics, and it's going to be a pain. But there's a lot of really valuable, useful data, especially for threat hunting missions with PowerShell. Because there are some obvious things that ransomware actors use PowerShell for that you can kind of monitor for, like disabling admin accounts or creating new admin accounts. Really common things that ransomware actors do that probably aren't being done very often during the normal course of the workday. The other thing, really simple, look for new scripts that hadn't been previously run, especially at odd hours. Ransomware actors love to work overnight on Friday and Saturday night because they know that the networks tend to be less secure and there tend to be fewer people monitoring. So look for scripts that are running at odd hours. But again, just looking for new scripts is a great way to detect anomalous activity. And then you can go to your admin, hey, is this you all? No, it's not. Great, let's investigate. And so that's a great way to do it. I like to tell people, and hopefully this is a PG-13 thing, but what I like to tell people is log your PowerShell and then look for weird shit. Because every network, the definition of weird is a little bit different. So knowing what is normal on your network, and then anything that is not normal is weird on your network, and that's what you should be looking for. And it's, I know it's a little bit of a pithy saying, and it's a lot more complex than that, but it really does come down to that. Build a baseline as PowerShell activity on your network, and then anything out of that baseline, that's what you need to investigate. And again, that goes a long way to detecting ransomware actors early and often, when they get in your network. So the other thing we're seeing an increase in the use of by these ransomware groups is sideloading attacks. So sideloading is the installation of software from a third party, kind of rather than the main organization. So you're basically taking advantage of stolen certs, and there's a lot of stolen certs that are used to sign software that are readily available on underground forums to install software. And again, a lot of this is PowerShell is used to do a lot of this. But that use of sideloading is another way that ransomware actors are really spending their time and trying to get around the security tools. So looking for signs of sideloading attack, whether it's through PowerShell or through other sources. And a lot of this has to do with allow listing. Like if you've locked down your network and only these tools are allowed to use, or only these tools by these signers are allowed to be in use, that makes it a lot harder for a sideload attack to be carried out. So detecting those sideloading attacks is a really great way, again, early way to detect ransomware activity before they have the chance to do damage. I mentioned this earlier, but it's definitely worth bringing up again. Extortion-only attacks are really popular right now. So we're looking at Karakurt and Beanlean. And you saw Beanlean was one of the top ransomware groups right now, are really focused on extortion-only attacks. And so what they do is the attack starts the exact same way. They get to the part where they steal the data, and then they're out of the network. Then they send you a note saying, hey, we stole a bunch of your data. If you don't want it exposed on our dark website, then you need to pay us. And they'll often send you a sample and so on. This is an interesting business model, and I don't know how successful it actually is for these ransomware groups. They claim, of course, very successful, we're making all kinds of money, blah, 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 but you always have to remember ransomware actors are big fat liars. The problem with the extortion-only attacks is that nobody trusts ransomware groups. Nobody actually believes that if a ransomware actor says they're going to secure delete your data rather than post it to their website, that they're actually going to delete it. In fact, we've seen that. We've seen data stolen from organizations that were the ransomware actor swore up and down was going to be deleted, but instead of being deleted, we find it for sale 6 months later on one of the underground forums. And so that is one of the challenges with this model, but it's also a lot easier and a lot faster for these ransomware groups. They're able to carry out a lot more attacks in a shorter period of time because you just have to get in and get to the point where you can steal the data. You don't then have to worry about encryption and maintaining access to the main controller and all that other stuff. So for right now, it does seem to be a more common tactic. Just know that if you are a victim of an attack like this, they're not going to actually delete your data. They're going to say they will. They may even show you a little video of them supposedly deleting your data. They have not deleted it. And really consider that if you are thinking about paying the ransom, all you're doing is paying the ransom to prevent it from posting to their extortion site. You're not actually preventing that data from being shared anywhere. So just something to keep in mind there, but be aware that these attacks are much more common than they used to be, and we continue to see growth in them in the short term. We'll see whether or not we see a sort of long-term growth. Going back to the extortion or the data theft, ransomware groups love to use mega.io and other associated domains for exfiltration. So mega.io is a legitimate file sharing service that allows large file transfers, but also allows payment in Bitcoin. So ransomware actors love it because they can remain pseudonymous while uploading your files to it. If there is no legitimate reason for employees in your organization to use mega.io or any of its associated domains, just straight up block it. Block all the domains, block all of the IPs associated with them. You don't make it easy for the ransomware actors to get the data out. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that'll stop them from stealing data, because it's relatively simple for them to set up a command and control server on another machine and do that, but it will slow them down, and it also gives you another point of investigation, because you can go, oh, hey, this person tried to connect to mega.io at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. That's probably not good. Let's go investigate and see what else they did. And gives you a thread to start pulling on to find potentially malicious activity. Also, look for large file transfers. Ransomware actors are not subtle in getting the data off. We've often seen that they will compile 50, 100 gigabytes of data and then just push that all up into whatever server. That whoosh sound effect is the actual sound effect that files make as they leave your network. But they're pushing them all up at the same time. They are not they're not sending them up in small batches or anything like that to try and hide the activity. So if you have the ability through your next generation firewall to monitor for and block large file transfers, do that. And again, follow up and investigate. Who was doing a large file transfer? Why were they doing it at Friday 1 a.m.? We definitely want to go ahead and take a look at that and see if there's anything else there that we need to investigate. Ransomware groups love to use the same files for file transfers, so we see a lot of rclone, 7-zip, megasync, and there are a few others out there. Again, as with the AU kill, these are legitimate tools. They don't change their file hash signature a lot. So if you have an EDR, you can pop these file hashes into your EDR and start looking for these signatures in your network. So start looking for these files being used in your network, especially if they aren't files that normally would be there. There's no reason that an employee would actually have downloaded and used them, at least no legitimate reason. Then finding these files could be a sign that you've got a ransomware actor or somebody else trying to exfil large amounts of data outside of your network. So that, again, that's another one that you want to keep in mind when you are when you're looking for easy ways to kind of flag and alert on some of these ransomware activities. And then, we talked a little bit about the beginning, but keep an eye out for all of the reconnaissance tools that are used by ransomware groups. So this is just from this year, examples of where we've seen AdFind, where we've seen, AdFind is really, really popular with the ransomware groups, but where we've seen AdRecon, where we've seen Mimikatz, where we've seen Lasagna. We see the same tools being used over and over again by ransomware groups because they work and they're generally not detected. So knowing what these tools are, maintaining file hashes of them, and looking for their use in the network can be really important. If you can detect them at the file level, great. Sometimes, like with Mimikatz, it's a little bit harder because Mimikatz can be loaded in memory and your EDR may not be able to detect that. So then if you are collecting network traffic, looking for signs of the network traffic that these tools generate can also be really important. I know a lot of organizations don't collect network traffic, but if you are collecting it, that's a great way to go through and find the activity used by these ransomware groups. And again, you'll keep seeing the same tools used over and over again until kind of something new pops up and starts getting interesting. But a lot of the ransomware groups, affiliates especially, worked off scripts. So the ransomware as a service operator will build scripts for the affiliates to use, and they will, and the affiliates will continue using these scripts. So even if new and better tools come out, they will use what they're comfortable with, and they'll keep moving. A great example of this is some ransomware actors are moving to Brute Ratel away from Cobalt Strike. So Cobalt Strike's kind of been the standard for the last couple of years for red teaming tools used by ransomware groups, but some are moving to Brute Ratel. But we'll see that some of the older affiliates, the ones that have been doing it for a while, don't want to learn a new tool. And a great example is Quackbot has switched from deploying Cobalt Strike automatically to Brute Ratel because it's lighter and has more ways to avoid detection. But we'll see that some of the Black Box affiliates will take the Brute Ratel loader, and they will use it to download Cobalt Strike and then start using Cobalt Strike because it's what they're comfortable with and what they're familiar with. So think of it like all of your crazy aunts and uncles that complain every time Facebook makes a change to their GUI. They like what they like and they don't want any changes ever. And so ransomware actors are often the same way. So Active Directory, we've talked about it a little bit. Active Directory is a big part of ransomware activity. They need to get to the domain controller. They're often going to create new admin accounts so that they have full access. In fact, we'll often see that ransomware groups will create like 5 Active Directory accounts, but only use 2 of them. That way, if they get booted off the network, they have some backup admin accounts that can come in handy. So the question I always ask people when I walk into a new network is, well, when's the last time you did a security checkup of Active Directory? Active Directory turned 21 last year. And so many organizations have kind of a set it and forget it mindset with Active Directory, that they don't do a lot of checkups on it. They don't do a lot of health checks on it to make sure that they've got it configured with the current best recommendations from Microsoft. And Microsoft has some really good best practices outlined for securing Active Directory, and I encourage people to follow their guidelines because they can be really good and they can help protect you from some of the things that ransomware actors like to do to take advantage of it. But I also understand that, Active Directory can be really fragile, and I know a lot of security teams are afraid to make changes to the Active Directory configuration because if everything is working and you make a change, you may be down for 3 days while you're trying to figure out what the hell happened and how you fix it. And so completely understand why people would be hesitant to do an audit of Active Directory and to make changes, but you really have to do that. As security advice changes and as guidance changes from Microsoft, you really need to keep up with how you've updated configuration of your Active Directory. Again, I've been in networks where nobody's made any changes to the Active Directory configuration for 10 years, and that means you're several iterations behind current best practice recommendations for Active Directory. The other thing we talked about creating the multiple administrator accounts. So when you're conducting your audits, monitor for new admin users created. Know who should have admin and not have admin access, and make sure you're limiting who has admin access to just the people who need it. And that you're alerted every time a new administrator account is created, because that can be really important. And same thing, some ransomware actors will delete admin groups so that they're the only ones with admin access, making it harder to kind of boot them out. But they'll wait until the very end when they're about to launch the ransomware before they do that. So alerting when admin accounts are deleted can be important. But you may only have a very short period of time to act once that happens. So, in general, look for the creation of not just new admin accounts, but also new local admin accounts. So if you have your Active Directory locked down pretty well, some ransomware actors will try and make local admin accounts. And this is another fight that I know I'm not going to win, but I'm still going to put it out there. You don't need local admin accounts on every endpoint. You just don't. Not every user needs to have local admin access. And again, I understand the complaints. People get really used to having local admin access, being able to install whatever they want, and be able to make whatever changes they want to their machine. So I totally get why making that change is really unpopular, but that's also how you get ransomware, is giving everybody local admin access. So if you can remove that, you're actually making the organization safer. And I think oftentimes if you explain to people, we're doing this because we're trying to stop ransomware attacks, we're still going to give you the ability to install software that's allowed and so on. You just won't have you won't have administrator access to do it. That generally works. There is a way to do this, to remove local admin access, but still not disrupt workflow. And it takes some work. It takes some architecting, but once you've done it, then generally everyone's really happy, and you've got a much more secure network. So I will continue to push that local admin should be disabled, even if most people won't actually be able to do it, unfortunately. Cloud services, we've seen 2 attacks in the last month where ransomware actors took advantage of configuration errors in cloud services and used that to jump back to the local network and launch ransomware attack. In the case of Western Digital, it was Microsoft Azure, and then there was another example where they got in through the Google Cloud. So keep that in mind, that there is increasing interest in your cloud infrastructure, and that and that if there are configuration errors that ransomware groups can take advantage of, they will, and they'll use that access to get back to your network and then run ransomware, or steal a bunch of files without encrypting anything, and again do the data theft and hold your data for ransom. So that is something really important to keep in mind. We are also seeing And I mentioned this earlier, more and more ransomware actors have variants for ESXi and Linux. So we know they're looking for that in the network. We are seeing some Mac OS. There's a big story about how one of the developers of Lockheed built a prototype for Mac OS that probably wouldn't work. Or not Lockheed, Lockbit, excuse me. Built a prototype for Mac OS that probably wouldn't work. But it does show that ransomware actors in general are more interested in Mac OS. What they haven't figured out yet, and what may be a big challenge for them, is how do you do a mass ransomware deployment with Mac OS? There aren't any native Mac OS tools that really would foster distributing ransomware kind of to hundreds or thousands of machines the way it does with Windows. There are third-party tools that might help facilitate that, but right now we haven't seen any interest in ransomware groups in doing that. I've joked before that one of the best ways that you can protect yourself is if you switch to all Macs in your network. I realize for many companies that's not practical, but as of right now, it's true. You may still get a ransomware attack here and there, but you're not going to get a mass ransomware attack that shuts down your entire network. At least as of right now, if everybody were to follow that advice, then ransomware actors would eventually figure out how to deploy mass ransomware attacks on Macs. But for now, you'd be safe. We've talked an awful lot about defense today, and a lot of the kind of things that you can do to protect yourself. The problem is that right now, most of the main ransomware actors, the people that run the ransomware as a service and sort of the biggest ransomware threat groups, are operating out of Russia. And that means that they are effectively untouchable by law enforcement. We can issue subpoenas, we can issue indictments against them, but with a non-cooperating Russian government, the ransomware actors continue to operate with impunity. And in fact, there's been a lot of evidence that ransomware actors, since the invasion of Ukraine, ransomware actors have started working very closely with the Russian government, kind of come work for us or we're going to conscript you kind of thing. So kind of Monday through Friday, carrying out 9 to 5, carrying out attacks on behalf of the Russian government, and then freelancing on their own on the weekends. That appears to be the case with some ransomware groups. Others have more of an informal relationship. So all that being said, we are really starting to see, and this is just kind of some of the examples of ESXi and Linux that we've seen in the last in the last couple of months. So really, it is becoming much more popular to go after those. But all this is to kind of say that in addition to your defenses, we also have seen much more aggressive government action. So, earlier in January, early February, we took down, 27 different governments were involved in taking down the ransomware infrastructure. That was a huge win. They were able to not only infiltrate the infrastructure and get keys and distribute keys to victims, but then also take it down. And they're still mining the intelligence that they gained from having full access to those servers. So seeing this kind of more aggressive law enforcement action is good. Still every time one comes down, another group starts up. So we're still playing whack-a-mole, and unfortunately, no matter how good you get at whack-a-mole, the mole always wins in the end. But it is this kind of action that makes it much more difficult for carrying out ransomware attacks, even if you are in a country like Russia where you're not going to get cooperation from authority. And in this case, look at these flags. These are 27 countries that can agree on almost nothing, but they all freaking hate ransomware actors, right? This is one of these areas of world cooperation where everybody that's not Russia is no, we want to be involved in taking down ransomware actors. Nobody likes ransomware actors. And so this kind of level of cooperation and, the Biden administration's ransomware task force has been very, very effective at sharing intel and getting, infrastructure taken down. In the last year, there's been 30-some law enforcement actions against ransomware actors and the services that facilitate ransomware activity. That's a huge, huge number, and that's moving by law enforcement standards for cybercrime. They are moving very fast to shut things down. And it's not just the ransomware actors. Earlier this month, they also shut down the Genesis marketplace, which is where a lot of the initial access brokers were operating out of, and shutting that down makes it harder for ransomware actors to move forward. So kind of the point is that combination of government action and defense goes a long way toward is going a long way toward hopefully eventually stopping ransomware permanently, which is the ideal. So I want to thank you all very much for your time today, and appreciate it. And as always, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, great. Let's get a few questions in here. We're almost at the top of the hour. Let's just jump right in.
Sorry, I talked too much.
No, it was interesting stuff and totally worth it. First question. Do you think it is more secure and safer to have Azure AD as opposed to on-prem AD?
It is. So a lot of the Active Directory attacks are using well-known exploits because it's hard to patch your AD, right? Like, again, same problem. If you patch it, you're afraid you're going to be down for an extended period of time. So if you can use the Azure AD, there is some safety in that. You still have to monitor for activity and so on, what looks like legitimate activity. But in terms of exploitation, Microsoft Azure is up on keeping everything patched and up to date.
Okay. How often are ransomware groups developing new techniques or new exploits?
So we've seen two mass exploitation campaigns this year already. The Conti went after the Go Anywhere by Fortra, and that was a 0-day, and that was new and unique. We've seen it before with like Kaseya and Revel, but nothing this big. And then the other one was the ESXi ransomware, which took advantage of a vulnerability in VMware, but it was a well-known vulnerability. So it is something that we may see as a new tactic where these mass exploitation campaigns happen. The problem is neither of these campaigns seem to net the ransomware actor a lot of money. So they went through a lot of work. We don't think they made a lot of money off of them.
I actually have a follow-up to that. With the growth of tools to help in the coding and scripting, AI-based tools, have you seen an increase in just how fast they can spit out new exploits that could be connected to them?
Right now, no. AI, the sort of the AI tools available for that kind of thing are in early stage, and they're not quite mature enough to do that. They can spit out bad code, but they can't spit out good code, if you will, which is fine. A lot of ransomware code is bad anyway. Keep an eye on that space. You and I should talk about this maybe 6 months from now, because AI obviously is always learning and improving, and the ransomware actors are learning ways to circumvent the guardrails that are in place. Because technically, you shouldn't be able to ask an AI to build you some malware and build you an exploit. But we have seen where they're testing the sort of the edges to figure out if there are ways to bypass those guardrails. So in 6 months, you and I will have another conversation about this, and it'll probably be a different answer.
Looking forward to it. I'm hoping the outcome is positive for us. Let's get one more question in here. What changes are we seeing from cyber insurance companies with the increased attacks happening?
So what we're seeing right now is we're seeing cyber insurance companies are, if they are renewing policies, they're putting a lot more requirements on the policyholders to prove that they're actually meeting security standards. So it's a lot more work on your part if you want to continue having cyber insurance, because cyber insurance companies are tired of losing money on these policies, and they are tired of kind of being used to pay out ransomware actors. So there's definitely some big changes with cyber insurance, as anybody who's renewed recently has probably learned.
Okay, that's all the time we have for this first session. Thanks so much, Alan, for the great conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank you to everybody who listened. Really appreciate the time today.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session called Ransomware Best Practices for 2023. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Zerto, Unitrends, Abnormal Security, and HYCU for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. And right now, that great content is being provided by the one and only John O'Neill Sr., Chief Technologist at AWS Solutions. John has more than 25 years in IT, working as a consultant, architect, executive, speaker, and author. He's been involved in multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects. He has also authored material for the Thomson Reuters Aspiratory books and exec blueprints, and develops courseware for Pluralsight. John, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Thanks, David. It's great to be back, and I always enjoy when we can get together and present on some of these relevant topics that all of us in IT are challenged to support and navigate through, and there's none more relevant in the last few years than ransomware and cyber attacks in general. Alan did a great job and shared a ton of useful content in the last session, so let's see if we can build on that with this session. So as you mentioned, we're going to talk about some best practices that align with the current kind of threat landscape that's out there. And the first thing that I want to discuss right now going into this is that one of the best things we can do to deal with ransomware, both from a preventative standpoint and a remediation standpoint, is to support and adopt a secure first culture. And this is probably one of the hardest things that everybody struggles with for some pretty obvious and some not so obvious reasons. Many organizations, they have a hard time defining the value, the specific dollar and cents value of cybersecurity. Of course, they have no problem finding it once they've been the victim of attack and they've got to pay to get out of it. But to make those preventative investments is a different story. And that's also true when we talk about asking users, people on the front lines, whether they be the office or plant floor or warehouse, wherever they may be, asking them to take a little longer to do a task that they might have done a different way in the past, or all these kind of things, right? So we have to bring them all on board and get their support as we relentlessly pursue zero trust. And you're going to hear me use that word a lot, because I really feel that if I had to give a one word that describes ransomware, the attacker, our response to it, all those different things, I would use the word relentless. So I'm going to say relentlessly pursue zero trust. And when we talk about zero trust, I want everybody to understand that this is impossible to achieve if you do not implement an approach to least privilege. And a lot of organizations go part of the way towards least privilege, but they break down when it comes to some of the more common things, and we're going to talk about some of these specifically as we go forward here. But one example that I'll give you is that IT, as much as we've been saying don't do it for a decade or more, they still like to run with admin privileges. They like to give every IT pro a domain admin account and things like that, and we really need to get away from that. And I'll get into that more in a bit. So now, let me kind of zoom in on a specific concept when it comes to zero trust, and that is the maturity model. And this is, the maturity model is something that CIST kind of gives guidance on, and in fact, they just released guidance this month, updated guidance on the zero trust maturity model. I even put a link there for everyone so that they can go take a view at it. But really what CISA is doing with the zero trust maturity model is building upon the NIST zero trust standard or guidance, if you will, by defining 5 pillars. And these 5 pillars really kind of cover the core of what we have to accomplish. And the 5 pillars are really identity, devices, networks, your apps, workloads, and your data. Okay, and then we're going to look at each of those and how our visibility, orchestration, and governance kind of flow across them. And this really sounds complex because it is, but it's also simple in that it is specifically designed, this guidance, to give you a chip away at it approach. And the thing I like to tell people here, of course, David, you know I love my analogies and or euphemisms, whichever suits the moment. And the one I'm going to go with right now is question: how do you eat an elephant? And the answer to that is 1 bite at a time. And that's exactly how we attack implementing least privilege and zero trust. 1 bite at a time. We chip away at it. You don't have to look at the whole thing and go, this is just impossible. It's too much. It's too big. It's too great of an investment. It's too time consuming, whatever. Break it down into small pieces that you can just chip away at. You'll be amazed if you do that, how rapidly you will start improving the security posture of your organization. So moving on from zero trust and kind of narrowing right down at our identity best practices, we can start to talk about some of my key tips here for identity and how that relates to, again, preventing, protecting against ransomware, all those sorts of things. The first one that I'm going to talk about is a break glass account. A break glass account is the exception to the rule that I give about trying to have singular identity management, so don't have a bunch of different password control systems. Try and integrate everything into one. So if you use AD, try to take advantage of federation or AB integration, so that even when you log into your firewalls and those kind of things, you're going against that single identity management system. And you should just have 1 account available to you for the task that you're doing. Now, if you're an IT pro, you could have 3 or 4 accounts that align with the task. So you have your daily driver account, and that should be a very low privileged account. Okay, and you can see that's my second note here. Always use the lowest privileged account possible, principle of least privilege, and that's your daily driver. And then what you may have is you may have a local workstation or endpoint administrative account that only has admin privileges to that specific device. Then you might have a server level admin account, which gives you access to administer your application servers, your RDS session host servers, those type of things. And then finally, at the top tier, you would have a domain admin account. And the domain admin account should really be limited to the person who administers your domain controllers. So the person who is getting on there and modifying sites and services, creating site links or going in and editing group policies, those kind of things. They're very limited, and the person or people that administer them should have an additional domain admin level account. And then the final account is this break glass account, or I call this the ice cream truck account sometimes. And what that means is hey, if all of our domain admins, or the people with our global tenant administrator rights to our cloud tenant or whatever, if they happen to run out in the street excited because they see the ice cream truck coming and it runs them over, how do we as an organization get in and make sure that things continue to operate? Well, that's where the break glass account comes in, and this is really an account that you've created that has a highly secure password, so very randomized. And somebody, typically I put this in leadership's hands, so it could be the CIO, it could be the CEO, basically has this, kind of in a sealed envelope that is in a company firebox or safety deposit box or whatever. So it's an account that, if needed, you can get into it. And the reason we call it a break glass account is just like those fire alarms that you see where you have to take the little hammer and break the glass to pull the fire alarm. And then we're going to move through these other ones pretty quickly. We're going to talk about when we need elevation and we're using that least privileged account, we want to try to take advantage of privileged identity management and just-in-time technologies to do elevation as necessary for only as long as necessary. And this is a much smoother method to achieve what you need to achieve, nothing more, nothing less, and also to ensure that you have good accounting, so you have good records of what took place for your governance efforts. And it also, and this is a big one, prevents you from forgetting that you're logged in with a privileged account, like an administrator account, and you get distracted, and now for the rest of the day, you're kind of doing your daily driver tasks under that privileged state. That's a bad thing, so we don't want to do that. I've already mentioned to not use use admin accounts for daily drivers, and the reverse is true. Also, don't use a daily driver account for an admin account, meaning don't assign it admin privileges. It's saying the same thing in two different ways, so I don't need to go too far about that. Another one, MFA everything, and this gets a lot of varying responses from IT pros out there, and I'm sure you've seen this also, David, conversing with folks, in that they're like, hey, I get that I need MFA on my admin accounts and all that, but really it's a pain to put MFA on general user accounts, and how do we integrate MFA with things like our network infrastructure and that sort of thing? Well, don't focus on the how as reason why you should or shouldn't do something. Focus on the result, the benefit. And MFA on everything not only provides you a much more secure environment, but it also is going to help you achieve cybersecurity or cyber insurance policy obtaining or renewing. It's going to help you keep those premiums as low as you can, coverages as high as you can, co-insurance or deductibles as low as you can, all those different things. So if you're not using MFA for your users right now, you really should be. And I can tell you that most cyber insurance carriers they are now requiring MFA for any remote email access account. So if you have, for instance, M365, you're using Exchange Online, you have to have MFA on all the accounts that use that. If you're using on-prem, but you allow Outlook web access or you allow connection through a VPN, they still want you to MFA those accounts. So really, the way I tell people is if an account has email, you pretty much need to MFA it. And so why narrow it down there? Why not just MFA everything? And then conditional access. We're going to talk about that more in a minute, but essentially we're just going to try and narrow down what we give access to just what's needed, to just the account that needs it or the person that needs it for just the time period they need it. So we'll talk about that more here in a second. Now, I told you a second. Here's conditional access. So conditional access, and I'm going to focus on conditional access as it applies to Azure or Azure Active Directory in my examples here, simply because I live and breathe in that environment a lot. So one thing to understand is it isn't configured by default. You need to take action to really, truly take advantage of conditional access rules and policies. So don't just think, hey, I signed up. I have my my Azure tenant created because I've got my M365 licenses. I'm all good. I got conditional access protections, all these things. No, you still need to do some work. And two of the additional things beyond MFA, so the top three that I'm going to talk about, checking and making sure that they're matched to your organization, are country blocking, IP blocking, and MFA. And the country blocking and the IP blocking are really going to be specific to your location. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is if you're an organization that doesn't have remote workers or workers that travel outside your state, for instance, then you should absolutely configure rules to block for things that are even within the same region but out of state. Now, it's more common that we look at country blocking, and the reason for this is that in the current day and age, post-COVID, I don't run into too many organizations, even very small organizations, where somebody isn't working remote. They're not traveling occasionally. They go on vacation. They still log in and do work, those kind of things. So, narrowing it down state to state is a little bit ineffective and unreasonable. But certainly blocking countries is a big one because, I would say that there's probably a small amount of organizations out there that are regularly seeing logins from Iran or, Sudan or places like those. So you just block them right now. And if you do have an exception, fine, you'll deal with it when it occurs. But you don't want perfect to become the enemy of good, as Voltaire said, and as my buddy Sammy Leo loves to say. You want to implement solid strategies that assist your organization, and then deal with the exceptions when they occur. And you don't need to just limit it to the high-risk countries like Russia, China, those areas. If you know that no one in your company has traveled to Spain in the history of your company, then I see no reason why you shouldn't block that, right? The more you block, the more you lower your exposure, your threat landscape. So that's important. And IP blocking, of course, is another way to narrow it down and keep yourself to where only the connections that you want to get in are getting in. Again, I'll mention that break glass account. Having that ability to get back in your system if something locks out. And, I gave the ice cream truck example, but one that's more common is that we see people get ransomed and their identity management system, so their Active Directory domain controller or whatever, is compromised. And so none of those accounts are available to them. Well, this is where a concept that I talk about quite a bit called a secure fabric comes in, where you have this separate identity management infrastructure that kind of underlies everything else. And a break glass account can exist there and help you get back in and start to be able to implement your DR strategies and all those kind of things. So moving on, next thing I want to talk about, best practice, your incident response plans. And I'm going to tell you about my three-legged strategy for success here, and that is that incident response, business continuity, and disaster recovery are all individual items. You need all three, and they are very different. And I see this a lot where organizations try and create one. They say, oh, we have a DR plan, that's fine. Okay, that's 1/3 of what you need, right? Or they'll say, hey, we have a disaster recovery and a business continuity. Okay, you're getting closer, but you really need three. And the reason is they serve different purposes. The incident response is how you and the organization are going to react when you have a ransomware attack or when you have any form of incident. It could be non-security related. It could be, hey, we had a fire in the server room, whatever, but you need this incident response plan that becomes the playbook for how everyone acts. Excuse me. And then you have business continuity. Business continuity is what the business or the organization does to hopefully minimize losses, to keep operations running, while IT implements the DR routine to get everything restored. Because that's the difference between those two. Business continuity is not something IT does. So I always am perplexed when IT develops the business continuity plan, because what do they know about it? And then disaster recovery, this is where IT is, because this is the plan that says, okay, this is where our backups are. These are our RPO and RTO. This is how we're going to restore things. This is how we're going to transfer the data from our offsite backup back to our new one. That's all part of the DR strategy, and that takes time. So the business, the users are implementing business continuity procedures to give you that time. And this may mean that they're hand typing packing slips out in the warehouse, or they're writing down customer information at the front desk on a pad and paper. I mean, it can be very manual processes and that sort of thing. And it's important to understand that when you look at something, you go, well, we just can't, there's no way to do that manually. I would suggest you go back and you look again, and you look a third time and a fourth time, because the more that you say we cannot come up with a concept, the faster cash bleeds from your organization during an event. If you're able to get some sort of business continuity where you can still ship parts, for instance, to a customer, and where you can still keep customers checking into your hotel, whatever it may be, the more that you can do that, the less losses you incur while you're down. The less you can do that, the more losses you incur. So it makes pretty good sense. Now, when you have all these things, you need to test them. You cannot test enough. This is a test not only of the validity of the plan, but of the user knowledge and the IT team knowledge of how to execute properly when the time comes. So that's really important. And I want to mention, as part of that testing, engage your cyber insurance broker, right? Or your carrier. underwriter, whoever it is you work with and have a relationship with, get them in there and let them take a look at what you've got going on, and give you feedback on what they think you should do, and let them provide you resources to improve things, because you'll be amazed at how well that works out. It will really help you. Now, ask yourself the hard questions. This is really, really important. Okay, what happens if we pull the plug? What's going to stop working? What can we continue to do? What can we not do? That sort of thing. And when I say pull the plug, it could be pull the plug on a server. It could be pull the plug on a network. It could be literally pulling the plug on power to the data center. Whatever it is, think of different scenarios and ask yourself, kind of, what happens if I do this? Who does it affect? How does it affect them? What are the costs associated? All that. Already talked about the manual process. Ask yourself, are cloud-only operations possible? Because, most entities have some form of a hybrid infrastructure right now. And the benefit here is that means they've already got a tenant created and configured and that sort of thing. So if you have the ability to kind of spin up new servers in the cloud that are separate and run from there using virtual desktops, whatever it is you need to use, you can drastically reduce the downtime associated with sometimes rebuilding your on-prem stuff. This doesn't always work, but it's an option that I recommend people look at. You certainly have to define the length of outage that the business will tolerate, right? Your recovery time objective on your DR plan certainly has to be less than this, but ultimately what I tell people is this is the amount of loss that once you hit this number, the company's not coming back. People are going to lose their jobs. Company may close its doors. Things may happen. And unfortunately, in the modern era of ransomware, we have seen ransomware put a number of organizations completely out of business. Lincoln College in Illinois was one of those such victims. They survived the Spanish flu and COVID. They survived 2 world wars, all those things, and a ransomware attack ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back and took them out of the game. So it certainly can drive organizations out of business. And ask yourself, is there a perfect solution? And I'll tell you right now, the answer is no, there isn't. But if you get in the state of mind, in the frame of mind of working towards a perfect solution, the solution that provides you almost zero downtime before you have full recoverability, full capability, then that will allow you to think outside the box and accomplish many different things. And the last thing I want to mention here is engage leadership on these issues. It's super important. It's really important.
Okay, looks like we might have lost John for a little bit. So while we wait for him to get back online, I would just like to point out some of the upcoming things we're going to talk about, which you can see by downloading those slides in the resources section of your console. I'd also like to note that while we wait for John to get back online, you can take a look at upcoming summits. Some of them are related to ransomware and security. And you can see them at virtualizationreview.com. If you can just go there and click on the Summits tab right in the top right section, you get a list of upcoming summits. For example, On April 28th is DevOps in Your Cloud Infrastructure Summit, in which the editors of Virtualization Cloud Review, which is me, redmondmag.com, awinsider.net, and ADT Mag have created this free half-day summit featuring independent experts with real-world advice on how you can transform your enterprise with the cloud and DevOps. So don't miss it. So we're hoping John gets back online. I'll have to share with you that he was struck with a stomach bug over the night, and he still showed up, a real trooper, to do this presentation. And I recently had such an experience, and believe me, I would not be able to have done any kind of a presentation in the shape I was in. So hopefully he can recover and get back online. In the meantime, other summits coming up. One is for May 3rd. It's called Hybrid Cloud Security, where those same editors will walk you through the threats to your hybrid cloud environment you need to know, plus the do's, don'ts, and other insights they've learned from their day-to-day experience. Again, the list of upcoming summits can be found at virtualizationreview.com, redmondmag.com, awsinsider.com, and adtmag.com. So go to any one of those sites, click on the Summits tab that should be up in the top right, and you can see the list.
Hi, David. I'm I'm back. I have to apologize to you and everyone else. I've been struck with a stomach bug, and it's like a bad case of ransomware, right? We're trying to work through it, but it's relentless.
Yeah, I was just explaining to the audience that I had a similar episode earlier, and I could not have done any kind of a presentation in the shape as I am. So I really admire your work and let you get back to it. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Where I was at, I was talking about engaging leadership and users. This goes back to that first tip about a secure first culture. You really need everyone to buy in, from the top of the organization down to the frontline user. If they all buy in that this benefits not just IT, but benefits them, it benefits the customers, it benefits the organization, you will not only find that it's easier to get the resources you need to get it done, but you'll have an easier time getting people to attend trainings, getting people to implement new processes and procedures that you have to constantly adapt and develop. You'll just find that it is far more effective than simply, kind of trying to force feed every time you have to implement something new. Now, you just got done asking yourself the hard questions. Well, now you need to ask your partners hard questions. Put them in the hot seat, right? Ask them how they're going to help you. How are they going to show up in your moment of need? Are you going to have to beg for help and wait hours and hours, or are they going to drop everything and be there to be, your army in reserve? And I call that their attack response protocol. How do they respond to you when you've been the victim of an attack? Okay. Part of that is to understand how they help you manage your alerting platforms, your, IPS, IDS, DLP systems, all those different systems. Do you have some sort of managed security relationship in place where they're monitoring it in real time and responding for you? Or do you need to, initiate that and follow some sort of checklist or protocol for engaging them? Better to understand that now than try to learn it on the fly when you're under heavy stress. And I always put this at the bottom because you wouldn't believe how many times I get engaged to help with something, and I find that a partner, regardless of what service or product they're providing, is not doing industry standard type data encryption both at rest and while in transit, right? So they say, sure, I have encryption at rest. Our servers, we all of our storage clusters, they're fully encrypted, so on and so forth. And then I ask them, well, okay, so what about while my data is moving from my server to your server, or from one of your servers to another server in-house? And that's where it starts to fall down, right? On the first one, they jump right up and they're like, hey, yeah, we use VPN, so it's encrypted in transit from you to us. And I say, okay, well, you have 5 data centers throughout the country. Are you replicating between them? Yes, we are. Well, is it encrypted as it moves between them? Maybe. Well, let's find that out. Let's know now. So put them in that hot seat. Now, next to the secure first culture, I would say that my number 2 tip is training. Training for both your IT team and your end users. So let's start with the IT team members. Okay, I live a lot in the Microsoft ecosystem, the Azure ecosystem, that sort of thing. So I have good familiarity with a number of their new training and certification programs. I listed some up here. These are great ones to, not only gain some technical knowledge background, but to prove that you've got those skills that you can then go put them to work. So there's a few, and I do suggest taking advantage of Microsoft Learn. I think it's learn.microsoft.com. You will find countless hours of training on there free of charge, and it's some great training developed by some of the best trainers that are out there. Now, when it comes to your users, the word to note here is repetitiveness. So train your users repetitively. You can't just train them once and say, okay, see you next year. Nope. 1, security evolves faster than that. 2, they'll forget things because they're not doing them. And so you want to be like a broken record on repeat, just over and over and over. Relentlessly train them. Find a way to explain to them why cybersecurity is important to them, right? Why it could make the difference between everybody in the warehouse getting sent home because none of our systems are online and we can't afford to pay everybody day in and day out while we're not earning any money, right? Or some other method. You want to take an approach where you simulate something. So maybe it's a phishing email. Maybe you simulate it. Then you review the results. So did they click on that link? Did they forward it to IT without doing anything, right? Did they open the attachment? Whatever it is, review. Train as necessary to change behaviors where needed. And then repeat the same process over and over and over again. You should adapt to your audience. The type of training and the way you train differs between the marketing assistant and the production supervisor and the CEO. They might each require a different approach, a different type of manner, scheduling problems, whatever. So adapt to your audience and leverage those remote learning technologies. Microsoft Stream is one of my favorite ones now because we became so dependent on Teams and Zoom and other things for remote work during the pandemic. They say, hey, we can use this same kind of thing and use it to distribute training. So, Stream is pretty much integrated with Teams. It's where the videos of meetings are recording. So you can create a Teams meeting and just kind of record your training, and then it's immediately available or quickly available for you to distribute, that sort of thing. You can also create the content using other tools, maybe more sophisticated tools to add call outs and such, and then put it on Microsoft Stream so that you can distribute it via a link or whatever. But in any case, whatever method you use for training, whether it be video, whether it be informative emails, whether it be on site, keep it succinct. I don't want to say necessarily short, but you certainly don't want it to be long. Take frequent breaks, break it into chunks over multiple training if you need to, but it reminds me of a calculus class I had in college where it was a 3-hour class, and it was 3 days a week, I think. And the problem is my brain shut off at about hour 2. So there was an hour worth of training that I just missed, right? I was there, I was present, my eyes were there, but my brain was kind of tapped out. Hey, I'm full, checking out now. And you certainly don't want that with your users. You want to make sure that they're there and full of energy and primed to learn what you're about to share. Okay, now moving on. Your backup strategy, that DR strategy we talked about. The thing I want to focus in on right now is immutability, right? And it's just a word that means nothing more than unchangeable. So once the backup is written, it cannot be changed. So therefore, it cannot be corrupted by ransomware or those sorts of things because it's unchangeable. Now, there's different ways to create an immutable backup. That can be through software provided by vendors. A lot of your big backup vendors have immutable solutions built in. They're software-based, so there's that. But you can also create immutable backups using strong, just out-of-the-box solutions, like, for instance, creating some automation that enables and disables a network port that the backup target's connected to, so that you only pump a backup to it, or the port's only enabled long enough to pump the backup there, and then it's disabled. And then, of course, you wrap that around with multiple ACLs and all sorts of different things. But, take the immutable concept further, right? Look at your cloud storage solutions. Can you do immutable backups there? What about your storage where you're keeping all of these, whether they be on hyper-converged infrastructure or standalone backup targets, whatever? Look at that storage and what immutable options it supports. And then the third and final one is, the things the vendors offer. So check with them and say, hey, I want to use this software I have from you or this DR solution from you, and I want to implement immutability. How do I do that in your software? What do I do? What options do I have? Sometimes, it's included. Maybe it requires a different license, but check with them. And then the second part of making sure that your immutable backups are there when you need them is to harden your backup targets. Backup targets pose a significant risk for 2 reasons. One, they are high value for attackers. So an attacker who wants to extort you for money, so they ransom all your data and they want to extort you for money, they're not probably going to get paid if you have a strong backup you can just restore from and be done with it, right? So they want to corrupt your backups. That's one of their highest goals. And the second part of that is that unfortunately they're often easy to attack because as IT pros, we have limited resources, limited time, limited budget, all those things. And so we tend to focus the lion's share of that on our production systems, our production servers, our production storage clusters, those kind of things. And we forget about our backup targets. So don't do that. Get in there and harden them, protect them with ACLs at the network level, right? Maybe even put some application firewalls in place. Definitely make sure that you're patching them on the same cadence as your production servers, and don't have any extra software, on there that you don't need. So finally, I'm going to mention something that we developed kind of in addition to our secure fabric. We came up with what we call an RDSN, or a rapidly deployable secure network. And what this does is it creates a quickly deployable standalone network where I can, one, possibly implement clean machines that get people up and running quickly while I work on the production systems, or two, move the systems that I'm cleaning, that I'm verifying are clean, from the production network to this standalone network to, again, allow them to work side by side without risking putting them back on the compromised network and having them be re-compromised. The design uses quick, direct internet access technology, so could be cellular, a lot of success with satellite, and then I design solutions for specific use cases. So I often have multiple RDSNs ready to go. Some that use satellite that are great for heavier concentrations of users, maybe 25 or 30, 50 users. And then I have other ones that are cellular based that are great for, a handful of users, maybe a department or that sort of thing. Just used one recently to get a payroll department up and running so that they could complete payroll completely separate. They used a web-based payroll system. It wasn't a problem. They just needed the ability to access it, the ability to key in information and all that sort of thing. So this took care of that. It's just another way that we can increase the agility of our cyber defenses, which help us better respond to those attacks that are constantly evolving. And with that, I'm going to quickly answer one question and then turn it over to Dave to see about some of the other questions. But the one I want to answer is Joseph has a question about Microsoft Stream. I'm sorry, my voice, the talking a lot, and like I said, the stomach thing's going, so I apologize if I'm not enunciating well. It's Stream, S-T-R-E-A-M. So it's a streaming service that basically makes the video content of different things in Microsoft, particularly Microsoft Teams, available. So it's Microsoft Stream. So with that, David, handing it back to you, buddy.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. Yeah, we have a big session coming up for the third session, so we'll just try and squeeze in one question and give everybody time to prepare for that. And John, I know you're a cyber insurance expert, so this last question is right up your alley. Is cyber insurance necessary and worth the expense?
Well, that's you sure picked a good one. For those that don't know, I spend hundreds of hours every year focused in on cyber insurance and what the underwriters are looking for and how they're targeting the market and that sort of thing, and then trying to align that with organizations so that they can obtain this insurance that is such an integral part of making them whole when an event occurs. Unfortunately, I see a lot of people that are like, well, it's not worth the investment. It's not something that we really think we need, whatever. And I tell them, I'm like, so, Would you take your 16-year-old kid and put him in your brand new Corvette and not have car insurance? Well, no, that's a different story. No, it isn't. You have car insurance because you want to ensure that if something happens unexpectedly, because it always is unexpectedly, that's why they call it an accident, that you have somebody behind you to make you whole, right? Pay off that car, pay for medical expenses, whatever it may be. Well, same thing with cyber insurance. You want to have that in your back pocket so that it can help make you whole, because maybe, you lose considerable amount of revenue based on the attack. You have to spend considerable money to rebuild equipment and hire contractors to help and do all these things. I really believe that every company who can obtain cyber insurance should obtain cyber insurance. And, I could go for hours and hours, David, as you know, but I just want to give everybody the truth and the hope that you can do things to actively keep your premiums low and your coverages high, but it requires work, and it requires you engaging the cyber insurance partner, whether that be your broker or agent or underwriter or whatever, and having those open conversations with them and tell them, hey, I want to partner with you, right? This is a partnership. And I want to understand what it is you want me to do, how I can do it, what will that gain me, what will it won't gain me, and work with them well in advance. If you wait until the day you want to just renew your policy, you're going to be in trouble. I spend all year long working towards strategies and things that I can do that when renewal time comes, I put them all down like a portfolio. And that is what makes my companies, the ones that the insurance underwriter is like, this is the company we want to issue a policy to. So get cyber insurance and have faith in yourself that you have the tools and technology to get it done.
Okay, great. Well, looks like that's all the questions we have time for. So thanks again, John, for an excellent presentation and answering those questions. We know you were under the weather, so we really appreciate you stepping up to the plate and delivering like a pro.